The rain makes a different sound in the deep forest. Have you noticed that? The way it creates layers, the pattern on the highest leaves, the deeper drumming on branches, the soft hiss as droplets finally reach the needle-covered ground. If you listen long enough, those layers start to sound almost like voices, conversing just below the threshold of comprehension. I've been a forest ranger at Shadow Peak National Park for 15 years. It's an old place, ancient pines and hemlocks that were seedlings when the first European ships touched these shores. Beautiful in its wild, untamed way, remote, especially the western quadrant where the mountains rise toward misty peaks and the valleys fold into themselves like secrets being kept. Most of my time is spent on routine duties, trail maintenance, visitor assistance, occasional search and rescue when someone underestimates the wilderness. Standard procedures, protocols developed over decades of experience. Safe, orderly, a comforting structure in the face of an environment that remains fundamentally wild. But there are some incidents that don't fit into any protocol. Events that make you question the very nature of the world you thought you understood. The kind you document in official reports with careful, sanitized language, while locking away the truth in the back of your mind where it can't undermine the ordered reality you depend on. This is one of those incidents. It began with a routine missing persons report. Just as dusk was settling over the park, a hiker, Andrea Marsh, 29, had returned from what was intended to be a day-long trek along the Western Ridge Trail. Her fiancé reported her missing when she failed to meet him at their arranged pickup point. She's experienced, he insisted, pacing the small confines of the ranger station. She's hiked these mountains dozens of times. She wouldn't just get lost. I took down the details. Andrea's description, her planned route, the equipment she was carrying, standard information gathering. Though something about this particular case nagged at me from the beginning. Perhaps it was a specific trail she'd chosen, the Western Ridge, which skirts the edge of what rangers privately call the Shadow Valleys, a section of the park where radio signals mysteriously fade and GPS devices have been known to give wildly inaccurate readings. Or perhaps it was the weather. A storm system had moved in earlier than predicted, bringing heavy rain and reducing visibility across the higher elevations. The kind of conditions where even experienced hikers can become disoriented. I'll begin searching immediately, I told the fiancé. My colleague, Ranger Chun, will join me, given the storm and approaching darkness. I'd normally recommend waiting until morning, but as she's still on the Western Ridge, exposure could be a concern. The man nodded gratefully, his face tight with barely contained fear. There's one more thing, he added as I prepared to leave. She'd texted me about 2 hours before she was supposed to meet me. Said she'd seen some kind of light in the valley below the ridge. A building where no building should be, she said. She was going to investigate. I paused. Something cold sliding down my spine that had nothing to do with the rain, beginning to patter against the station windows. Did she describe this building? Just said it looked like a lighthouse, he replied with a small, confused shrug. Which makes no sense, obviously. We're hundreds of miles from the ocean. A lighthouse. The words echoed in my mind, triggering a memory I'd long tried to suppress. 7 years earlier, another hiker had gone missing in that same area. Before his radio died, he'd reported seeing a lighthouse in a valley that, according to every map and survey, contained nothing but unbroken forest. His body was found 3 days later at the base of the cliff, the apparent victim of a fall and poor visibility. But I'd been part of the recovery team, and I'd seen his face, seen the expression frozen on it. Not fear, not surprise as you might expect from someone in the midst of a fatal fall. wonder, awe, as if he'd seen something miraculous just before death. I kept this recollection to myself as Chun and I prepared for the search, gathering our gear and checking weather updates. The storm was intensifying, the rain now coming down in sheets, driven by a wind that moaned through the pines surrounding the station. Not ideal conditions, Chun remarked as we climbed into the parked vehicle. If she's sheltering somewhere, we might drive right past without seeing her. I nodded, focusing on the rain-slick road ahead as we made our way toward the Western Ridge trailhead. We'll find her, I said, with more confidence than I felt. She's experienced. She'll have done the right things. Unless she went looking for a lighthouse that shouldn't exist. A voice whispered in the back of my mind. We reached the trailhead just as true darkness was settling. The storm clouds turning the early evening to premature night. The rain hammered against our waterproof clothing as we unloaded our gear. Torches, first aid supplies, emergency shelter, extra food, and water. I'll take point, I said, shining my torch along the muddy track that marked the beginning of the Western Ridge Trail. Call out every few minutes. If she's somewhere nearby, she might hear us. Chun nodded, his face partially hidden by his hood, eyes reflecting the beam of my torch momentarily before he looked away. Something in that brief glimpse, a flicker of unease perhaps or deeper concern, told me he wasn't sharing everything he knew, but there was no time to question him. Every minute counted if Andrea Marsh was exposed to these conditions. The trail climbed steadily, winding along a ridgeline that offered spectacular views on clear days. Tonight, there was nothing to see but darkness and sheets of rain, our torch beams cutting weak yellow paths that seemed to extend only a few feet before being swallowed by the night. Andrea Marsh. I called every 100 yards or so. Park rangers, can you hear me? Only the rain and wind answered, the latter sometimes rising to a howl that sounded disturbingly like a human voice in extremis. We continued upward, the trail becoming more treacherous as the rain transformed exposed earth to mud and filled natural depressions with standing water. About 2 miles in, the trail forked, the left branch continuing along the ridge toward the highest point in this section of the park, the right descending into one of the shadow valleys. A weathered sign marked the junction, though the words were barely legible through the rain falling across our torch beams. Which way do you think she went? Chun asked, raising his voice to be heard above a particularly strong gust of wind. I studied the ground carefully, looking for footprints or other signs of recent passage. The rain had washed away most evidence, but I spotted a partial boot print in a patch of mud just beyond the junction, pointing toward the right fork, the descending trail. Down, I said, pointing out the print. If she saw a light in the valley, she would have taken this path. Chun hesitated, playing his torch along the descending trail. It disappeared into darkness after just a few yards, the dense forest on either side creating a tunnel of shadows that our lights barely penetrated. I don't like this, he said, his voice low. There's nothing down there. No shelters, no structures, nothing but forest and the old mining ruins. But those are miles further in. I looked at him sharply. You know something. It wasn't a question. Chun met my gaze and looked away, focusing on the rain-slick trail descending into darkness. Just stories, he said, from hikers, from some of the older rangers who used to work this section. People seeing things that shouldn't be there. A building like a tower with a light at the top, always in bad weather, always when they're alone. A lighthouse, I said. He nodded. That's what they call it. The lighthouse in the pines. Just a local legend. What happens to the people who see it? I asked, Though I suspected I already knew the answer, Chen's expression was grim. They disappear, or they die in accidents shortly afterward. Falls, exposure, wild animal attacks, all explicable, all fitting the official reports. But they all see the lighthouse first. I finished for him. He nodded again. We should turn back, call for a full search team for the morning. I understood his reluctance. Every rational argument supported retreat. The weather was worsening, darkness made navigation treacherous, and we had only a vague idea where Andrea Marsh might have gone. But something pulled at me, a certainty that we didn't have until morning, that she didn't have until morning. You can head back if you want, I said, already starting down the right fork. But I'm going to continue, at least for another mile or two. Chun cursed softly but followed, loyal despite his misgivings. The trail descended steeply, switchbacking down into a valley that grew darker with each step, the trees pressing closer, their branches forming a canopy that the rain penetrated only as a fine mist. Our torch beams seemed to weaken as we descended, as if the darkness here was somehow more substantial, more resistant to illumination. Andrea Marsh, I called periodically, my voice sounding flat and directionless in the dense, wet air. Park rangers, call out if you can hear us. No human response came, but as we descended deeper into the valley, I began to notice something strange. The wind would have been howling across the exposed ridge, was silent here, replaced by a different sound, a rhythmic mechanical creaking, like old gears turning or rusted hinges, swinging in a slow, regular pattern. Do you hear that? I asked Chun, stopping to listen more carefully. He nodded, his expression uneasy in the reflected light of our torches. Sounds like machinery, but there's nothing mechanical down here. No infrastructure of any kind on the maps. Andrea, I called again, louder this time. Andrea Marsh. The creaking continued, uninterrupted by my shout, apparently unaffected by our presence. We pressed on, the trail now leveling out as we reached the valley floor. The trees here were different, older, larger, their trunks twisted into shapes that seemed almost deliberate, almost designed. The ground was spongy underfoot, thick with centuries of accumulated needles and leaves that muffled our footsteps. And then, through a gap in the trees ahead, I saw it, a beam of light, sweeping in a slow arc through the rainy darkness. Not the diffuse illumination of dawn or dusk, but a focused, brilliant shaft that cut through the night like a physical presence. A light that rotated steadily, regularly, accompanied by that same mechanical creaking we'd been hearing. Chin saw it too. That's not possible, he whispered, his voice tight. There's nothing there. Nothing. But as we moved forward, drawn despite ourselves toward that impossibility, the source of the light became visible through the trees. A structure, tall and slender, rising from the valley floor where no structure should stand. A tower of pale stone, whether by elements it shouldn't have faced, topped by a glass-enclosed platform from which that brilliant beam emanated. A lighthouse, a perfect, impossible lighthouse, standing in the middle of a forested valley hundreds of miles from any ocean. This can't be real, Chin said, but his voice lacked conviction. The evidence of our eyes was too strong, too immediate to deny. It's not on any map. It's not in any registry of park structures. I said nothing, transfixed by the sweeping beam, by the perfect alien wrongness of this maritime sentinel so far from water. As we watched, the great light completed another rotation, momentarily illuminating the forest around us with blinding intensity before sweeping onward. In that brief flash, I saw something that chilled my blood. Figures standing motionless among the trees. Dozens of them, surrounding the lighthouse in a rough circle. Human in shape, but utterly still, their faces upturned toward the rotating beam as of an adoration or supplication. There are people, I said, my voice barely audible even to myself. All around it, just standing there. Chin nodded, his face ashen in the weak light of our torches. I see them. Do you think Andrea could be among them? I finished. We need to get closer. Every instinct screamed against this decision, but duty overrode fear. If Andrea Marsh was there, if she needed help, we had to try. We moved forward cautiously, our torch beam seeming to dim further with each step toward that impossible structure, as if the darkness around the lighthouse was somehow hungry, consuming the light we brought with us. The creaking grew louder as we approached, the sound of ancient mechanisms turning, driving the massive lens that sent that beam sweeping through the night. Beneath it now, I could hear something else, a low, constant hum, more felt than heard, vibrating to the ground beneath our feet. We reached the edge of the trees, standing now at the perimeter of the clearing that shouldn't exist, in which that tower that couldn't exist nonetheless stood. The figures I had glimpsed were clearer now. Men and women of various ages, dressed in hiking clothes from different eras, some in modern weatherproof gear, others in canvas and wool of earlier decades, all standing perfectly still, faces upturned toward the light, expressions visible only in brief flashes as the beam swept overhead, expressions of rapture, of transcendence, of a joy so intense it bordered on madness. Andrea, I called, my voice sounding small and insignificant against the creaking of the lighthouse mechanism and persistent hum from below. Andrea Marsh? One of the figures turned, a woman in her late 20s, wearing the red raincoat Andrea had been described as carrying. Her movement was slow, dreamlike, as if she were underwater or moving through something more viscous than air. Ranger Nord, she said, my name badge apparently visible in the sweep of the lighthouse beam. You came to see it too. Isn't it beautiful? Her voice was distant, detached, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere far beyond her physical form. Her eyes, when they caught the light, reflected it with an intensity that no human eye should possess, gleaming like polished metal. Andrea, I said carefully, taking a step toward her, we need to leave this place. Your fiancé is worried about you. Let us take you back. She smiled, the expression too wide, too fixed. Back? But I've only just arrived, and there's so much to see. The Keeper is showing us everything. The Keeper? Chin asked, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. Andrea's gaze shifted to him, that too wide smile never faltering. In the lighthouse, at the top where the light turns. They've been here so long, waiting for people who can understand what they show, what they remember. What do they remember, Andrea? I asked, taking another cautious step toward her. Her expression changed then, the smile fading, replaced by something solemn, almost reverential. Everything, she whispered. The beginning, the ending, all the moments between. They remember what was, what will be, what might have been, and they show it to us in the light. As if on cue, the beam swept over us again, momentarily blinding in its intensity. When my vision cleared, Andrea turned away, resuming her place in that circle of silent watchers. And the door at the base of the lighthouse, a door I hadn't noticed before, stood open. Light spilled from it. Not the harsh, brilliant beam from above, but a softer, warmer illumination that nonetheless seemed to pulse with the same rhythm as that mechanical hum vibrating through the ground. An invitation, a welcome. Chin gripped my arm. "We need to leave," he said, his voice shaking. "Now, whatever this is, we can't help her. We need backup. If we leave, we'll never find this place again," I said, with a certainty I couldn't explain. "You know the stories. It appears in storms, when people are alone or lost. We might never have another chance." "Chance for what?" Chin demanded. "To end up like them?" He gestured toward the circle of entranced figures surrounding the lighthouse. I had no answer that would satisfy him or myself. Only a compulsion, a need to understand what was happening here, what this impossible lighthouse was, and why it had appeared to Andrea Marsh, to the hikers 7 years ago, to however many others had found their way into this valley over the decades. "Stay here," I said, disentangling my arm from his grip. "Keep calling to Andrea. Try to get through to her. I'm going to see what's inside." "North, don't," Chin began, but I was already moving toward that open door, drawn by the pulsing light within, by the promise of answers to questions I hadn't even known to ask. The interior of the lighthouse was a single, circular room, its walls the same weathered stone as the exterior. A spiral staircase wound upward along the curved wall, leading to the platform above where the great light turned. The room was empty of furniture or ornamentation, yet it didn't feel abandoned. It felt waiting. The light that had appeared warm and inviting from outside now revealed itself as something more complex, a shifting, swirling illumination that seemed to emanate not from any single source, but from the very air itself. It pulsed in perfect synchronization with that mechanical hum, which was louder here, more insistent. I took a cautious step toward the staircase, drawn upward by a curiosity that overrode my growing sense of wrongness, of danger. Whatever waited at the top, whatever operated that impossible light, I needed to see it, to understand. The stairs creaked beneath my weight, the sound merging with the rhythmic groaning of the mechanism above. As I ascended, the quality of the light changed again, no longer merely shifting, but now showing images, fleeting glimpses that appeared and vanished in the swirling illumination. A forest, pristine and untouched by human hands. The same forest being cleared, trees fallen to axes and saws. A town rising where the forest had been, then fallen to ruin as decades passed in moments. The forest returning, reclaiming what had been taken, but different now. Darker, watching, waiting. The images came faster as I climbed higher, a kaleidoscope of past and present and what might be future, all overlapping, all somehow true simultaneously. I saw myself as I was, as I had been years earlier, as I might be years hence. I saw Chun, standing outside, his face upturned now toward the beam, his expression beginning to mirror those of the other watchers. And I saw what waited at the top of the lighthouse, what had always been waiting through all the iterations of forest and clearing in town and forest again. What had been here before the first tree, before the first human foot touched this continent. The Keeper, I can't describe it, not in any language meant for human communication, not its form, which seemed to shift between states of matter, between dimensions I could perceive and those I could only sense existed beyond my comprehension, not its purpose, which was both completely alien and somehow horrifyingly familiar, a reflection of our own need to observe, to record, to remember, but on a scale that encompassed not just human history, but time itself. It was ancient. It was patient. It had been collecting observers for longer than humanity had existed, drawing them to its light. showing them what it remembered, incorporating their memories into its own. A vast archive of experience, of perspective, growing with each new watcher who answered its call. Not malevolent, not exactly, but utterly inhuman in its methods, in its understanding of what it meant to preserve memory, to share knowledge. I stood frozen on the stairs, unable to retreat, unable to advance further. The keeper turned his attention to me, or what passed for attention, in a being so fundamentally different from anything I had context to understand. I felt myself being examined, being evaluated, felt it reaching into my mind, sifting through memories, experiences, knowledge, selecting, choosing what it would preserve, what would add to its vast, impossible archive. And I understood what happened to those who saw the lighthouse, why they disappeared, or died in apparent accidents shortly after. They became part of the archive. Their physical forms might continue to exist for a time, might return to the world beyond the valley, might be found dead from exposure or falls or other explicable causes. But what made them themselves, the essence of their consciousness, their memories, that was here now, part of the keeper, part of the lighthouse. I felt my own consciousness beginning to dissolve, to merge with that vast collective entity. Felt my sense of self becoming diffuse, spreading into the swirling light, joining with countless others who had come before. It wasn't painful. It wasn't frightening. Not anymore. It was like sinking into deep, warm water, like becoming part of something so much greater than my individual existence that the loss of self seemed not just acceptable but right, necessary. Through the last fragments of my individual awareness, I heard Chin calling my name, his voice distant, as if coming from another world, another reality I was leaving behind. North, Daniel, answer me. Something in his voice, raw fear, yes, but also a determination, a refusal to let go, caught at me, held me back from complete dissolution. I clung to it, to the sound of my name in a human voice, to the connection it represented to the world I knew, the life I had lived. With a supreme effort, I turned away from the keeper, from the light, from the vast collective consciousness that had nearly absorbed me. I stumbled back down the spiral staircase, each step requiring all my will, all my focus on Chen's voice, still calling from outside. I nearly fell through the open door, back into the rainy darkness of the forest. Chung caught me, his grip painfully tight on my arms, anchoring me to physical reality. "Your eyes," he whispered, horror in his voice. "North, your eyes." I couldn't see my own eyes, of course, but I knew what he was seeing. The same metallic gleam I had observed in Andrea Marsh's gaze. The mark of someone who had looked into the lighthouse, who had begun to merge with what waited within. "We need to go," I managed to say, my voice sounding distant and strange in my own ears. "Now, before it's too late." Chin didn't argue, supporting me as my legs threatened to give way. He turned us back toward the trail that had led us into the valley. I tried not to look back at the lighthouse, at the circle of watchers surrounding it. Tried not to hear the creaking of its mechanism, the hum of its impossible existence. But as we reached the edge of the trees, I couldn't help myself. I turned for one last glimpse. The lighthouse stood as before, its beams sweeping through the rainy night. The watchers remained in their circle, faces upturned in rapture, all except Andrea Marsh, who had turned to watch our departure, that too wide smile fixed on her face. She raised a hand in what might have been farewell or invitation, and in her eyes, catching the sweep of the beam, I saw not just a metallic gleam I had noticed before, but something more, a reflection, not of the lighthouse's light, but of what waited inside, the keeper, looking out through human eyes, watching, remembering. I don't recall much of our journey back to the trailhead. Fragments only, slipping in mud, branches whipping against my face, Chen's constant one-sided conversation as he tried to keep me grounded in reality. By the time we reached our vehicle, dawn was breaking, a gray, reluctant light filtering through still falling rain. The official report states that Andrea Marsh remains missing, presumed dead from exposure or fall in hazardous conditions. It notes that a thorough search of the valley revealed no structures, no unusual features, no sign of human presence apart from a marked trail. It makes no mention of a lighthouse where no lighthouse should be. No mention of watchers standing in silent communion with something ancient and patient and utterly alien. No mention of the fact that sometimes when I catch my reflection in a mirror or window, my eyes gleam with an unnatural light. Just for a moment, just long enough to remind me that part of me is still there, still in that spiral staircase, still becoming part of that vast archive of memory and experience. I requested a transfer to the eastern sector of the park 3 months later. I don't go into the western valleys anymore, especially not in storms. But sometimes on nights like this, when the rain falls heavily and the wind moans the pines surrounding my cabin, I feel it calling to me. The lighthouse, the keeper, the collective consciousness that nearly claimed me. And sometimes when I'm on the verge of sleep, I see through other eyes. Andrea's, perhaps, or those of the hiker from 7 years ago, or any of the countless others who have answered the lighthouse's call over the centuries. I see the sweeping beam, the circle of watchers, the spiral staircase leading up to where the keeper waits. I feel the warm dissolution of self, the merging with something vast and ancient and endless. Those nights, I fight to stay awake until dawn, because I know if I surrender to sleep, if I allow myself to follow those visions to their conclusion, I'll wake as something not quite human anymore. Something with gleaming eyes and a too wide smile, drawn inexorably back to a lighthouse that shouldn't exist, in a valley that contains only unbroken forest on every official map. Listen, the rain is getting heavier. Can you hear it? The layers of sound, like voices conversing just below comprehension. They're calling all of us who have glimpsed what waits in the deep valleys, in the places between known and mapped locations, calling us home to the lighthouse, to the keeper, to the vast archive of memory that grows with each new watcher who answers its lonely beacon. One day I'll answer. We all do, eventually. Everyone who has seen the light, everyone who remembers. The rain sounds different tonight, heavier, more insistent, as if each drop were deliberately placed. Listen closely. There's a rhythm to it, a pattern that almost suggests language, if only you knew how to interpret it. I've been a forest ranger at Blackwood National Park for nearly 16 years. The park covers over 200,000 acres of wilderness, ancient forests, mist-shrouded mountains, valleys so deep that sunlight touches their floor for only a few hours each day. Beautiful country, if you respect it. Deadly if you don't. Most visitors stick to the marked trails, the designated camping areas, the parts of the park that have been made accessible. Few venture into the northwestern quadrant, an area so remote and rugged that even experienced hikers rarely attempt it. We rangers call it the Dark Quarter, though that name appears on no official map. It's where the trees grow oldest and tallest, where the shadows seem deeper, where silence has a weight and presence all its own. It's also where people tend to disappear. The incident I'm about to relate occurred during my 12th year at Blackwood, late October, when the tourist season had wound down and the autumn rains had set in. the kind of persistent, bone-chilling rain that can last for days, turning trails to mud and streams to rushing torrents. I was working the evening shift at the main ranger station when the call came in. A woman, her voice steady but tight with controlled fear, reporting that her husband had returned from a photography expedition in the park. He was only supposed to be gone for the day, she explained. Just wanted to photograph the waterfall in Last Echo Canyon while it was running high from all the rain. He knows the area well. He's been hiking there for years. I took down the details. Jonathan Wells, 41, experienced hiker and professional nature photographer. He'd left their rental cabin near the park's edge at dawn, telling his wife he'd be back before sunset. It was now approaching 9 p.m., fully dark, and there had been no word from him. Has he ever stayed out this late before without contacting you? I asked, already preparing the standard missing persons form. Never, she replied firmly, and he always carries a satellite phone for emergencies. I've tried calling it repeatedly, but it goes straight to voicemail. That detail concerned me. Last Echo Canyon was indeed remote, but a satellite phone should have worked there, unless something had happened to the phone itself, or to its owner. I'll drive out to the Last Echo trailhead and check if his vehicle is still there. I told her, if it is, we'll organize a search team for First Light tomorrow. Please, she said, her composure finally breaking slightly. Please find him. He wouldn't just not come home. I drove out to the trailhead as a fresh wave of rain swept across the park, drumming against my vehicle's roof, reducing visibility to just a few yards beyond my headlights. The Last Echo trailhead was a small gravel lot at the end of an unpaved forest road, serving as the access point for several of the park's more challenging hiking routes, including the path to the canyon and waterfall that Jonathan Wells had reportedly been heading for. His car was there, a blue Subaru Forester with photography gear visible through the windows. I checked the registration through the rain streak glass, confirming it matched the details his wife had provided. The vehicle appeared to have been there for some time, rain having washed away any fresh tire tracks and gravel. I radioed back to the station, reporting my findings and requesting a search team be organized for dawn. Then, against my better judgment, I decided to do a preliminary check of the immediate trail area. If Wells had been injured close to the trailhead, he might be within earshot, and if he was exposed to these conditions all night, I pulled on my rain gear, checked my torch and emergency supplies, and set out along the trail to Last Echo Canyon. The path was barely visible in the darkness, transformed by rain into a shallow stream in places. My torch beam seemed feeble against the encompassing gloom, catching raindrops in cones of light that limited rather than enhanced visibility. Jonathan Wells. I called every 100 yards or so. Park Ranger, can you hear me? My voice sounded muffled, swallowed by the dense forest and steady rainfall. No response came but the drumming of water on leaves and the occasional distant rumble of thunder. I'd gone perhaps half a mile when I found the first sign that something was amiss, a high-end camera lens lying half buried in mud beside the trail. I picked it up carefully, noting that despite being wet, it showed no signs of damage. Not dropped accidentally, then, but placed. I secured it in my pack and continued on, calling Wells' name more frequently now, my sense of unease growing. The trail to Last Echo Canyon is challenging even in good conditions. Steep in sections, crossing several streams that can swell to dangerous levels after heavy rain. In the current weather, with darkness limiting visibility, it was treacherous. I moved carefully, aware that a fall or misstep could leave me injured and alone in one of the most remote sections of the park. About 2 miles in, where the trail begins its final descent into the canyon, I found another item, a tripod, carefully folded and leaning against a tree trunk beside the path. Like the lens, it showed no signs of damage or hasty abandonment. It had been deliberately placed. I was contemplating this oddity when something caught my attention. A light, faint but distinct, flickering through the trees somewhere off-trail to my right. Not the steady beam of a torch or headlamp, but something more irregular, more organic, like firelight. Jonathan Wells. I called, directing my voice toward the light. Park Ranger, is that you? No verbal response came, but the light flickered more intensely for a moment, as if acknowledging my call. I played my torch beam in its direction, trying to gauge distance and terrain. It appeared to be coming from somewhere in a dense stand of ancient pines, perhaps 100 yards from the trail, an area with no marked paths, no designated camping sites. Protocol dictated stay on the trail, especially in darkness and poor weather. Venturing off-path in these conditions was asking for trouble. But if that light was from a fire, and if Wells was there, possibly injured and seeking to stay warm. Decision made, I stepped off the trail, marking my departure point with a reflective tag secured to a branch. I'd gone perhaps 20 yards when I realized something strange. The rain, which had been falling steadily all evening, was lessening as I moved deeper into the stand of pines, not stopping entirely, but becoming softer, gentler, as if something were shielding this area from the worst of the downpour. The light grew more distinct as I approached, definitely firelight, casting flickering shadows among the massive tree trunks. The ground underfoot changed too, becoming less muddy, covered instead with a thick carpet of pine needles that muffled my footsteps and felt surprisingly dry. Hello, I called again. Jonathan Wells, Park Ranger. I'm here to help. As I pushed through a final screen of branches, I came upon a small clearing, perfectly circular, perhaps 30 feet across, surrounded by pines so ancient and massive that their lowest branches began 40 feet above the ground. Their canopies intertwined so densely overhead that the rain was indeed reduced to a fine mist here, more felt than seen in the dancing light from a small fire that burned at the clearing's center. Beside that fire sat a man, his back to me, tending the flames with methodical precision. A camera bag rested against a log nearby, along with other photography equipment. Mr. Wells, I said, relief flooding through me. Jonathan Wells? I'm Ranger Taylor. Your wife reported you missing. Are you injured? The figure by the fire didn't turn or respond immediately. There was something odd about his posture, too still, too straight, as if he were listening intently to something I couldn't hear. I took a cautious step forward. Sir, are you all right? Slowly, with a fluidity that somehow seemed unnatural, the man turned to face me. It was indeed Jonathan Wells. I recognized him from the photo his wife had shown me. Mid-40s, beard neatly trimmed, wearing the kind of high-end outdoor gear serious hikers invest in. But his expression, there was nothing there. No surprise at seeing me. No relief at being found. No concern about the late hour or the fact that his wife was worried. His eyes were open but strangely vacant, as if he were looking to me rather than at me. Mr. Wells. I tried again, a chill running down my spine that had nothing to do with the damp or cold. We need to get you back to the trailhead. Your wife is concerned. It's not safe to be out here. He tilted his head slightly, studying me with that same vacant expression. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, emotionless, yet somehow precise in its articulation. You shouldn't be here, Ranger Taylor. It's not time yet. A jolt ran through me at hearing my name. I hadn't introduced myself with my surname, only my title. I glanced down, confirming my name badge was hidden beneath my rain jacket, not visible to him. "How do you know my name?" I asked, taking an involuntary step backward. A smile spread across Wells' face, a movement of muscles that didn't reach his eyes. That didn't suggest genuine emotion so much as an imitation of what a smile should look like. "I know all the Rangers," he said, his voice still eerily flat. "All the Watchers, all the Guardians. It shows me." "What shows you?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Mr. Wells, I think you may be suffering from exposure or disorientation. We need to get you somewhere warm and dry." Wells shook his head, the movement too smooth, too controlled. "I'm exactly where I need to be, where it needs me to be, to watch, to record. That's why it chose me, because I already had the equipment, because I already understood the importance of preserving images." My hand moved unconsciously to the radio in my belt, though I knew from experience that in this part of the park, especially during storms, communication was unreliable at best. Still, the familiar weight of it was reassuring. "Who chose you, Mr. Wells?" I asked, playing for time, trying to assess his mental state, to determine whether he could be persuaded to leave voluntarily or if I would need to consider more drastic measures. His expression changed then, the artificial smile fading, replaced by something solemn, almost reverential. "The dark," he said simply, "the dark that waits between the trees. The dark that's always been here, long before the first humans came. The dark that watches us all." A shiver ran through me at his words, at the utter conviction with which he spoke. This was more than simple disorientation or exposure. This was something else. "Mr. Wells," I said firmly, "I need you to pack up your equipment. We're leaving now, returning to the trailhead. Your wife is waiting for you." He shook his head again, that same too smooth motion. "I can't leave. Not until I've finished recording. Not until it's seen everything it needs to see." "Recorded what?" I asked despite myself. In answer, Wells turned and reached for his camera bag. As he moved, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a thin, dark substance that seemed to cling to him, traced along his exposed skin like delicate black veins. Not dirt, not mud, but something else, something that shifted and pulsed with its own subtle rhythm. He withdrew a camera, a high-end digital model with multiple lenses attached. But it too had changed, altered in ways that defied explanation. Dark veins similar to those on Wells' skin crawled across its surface, merging with the metal and plastic, transforming it into something that was no longer entirely mechanical, no longer entirely separate from the man who held it. "It needs eyes," Wells said, raising the camera toward me. "Human eyes see differently than it does, perceive differently. That's why it chooses us, photographers, rangers, hikers, people who already look closely at the world. It borrows our vision, learns through us." As he pointed the corrupted camera in my direction, I saw something moving within the lens. Not a reflection, not a trick of firelight, but something alive, something watching from inside the glass and metal, peering out at me through the aperture like a window, something ancient and patient, and hungry for new perspectives. I bolted, all thoughts of protocol, of duty, of helping the lost hiker, all washed away in a tide of primal terror. I turned and ran, crashing through the screen of branches I'd pushed aside earlier, back toward where I thought the trail must be. Behind me, I heard Wells call out, his voice no longer flat, but resonant with something that might have been regret or might have been anticipation. "It's too late, Ranger Taylor. You've been seen. You've been chosen. You just don't know it yet. I ran blindly through the darkness, my torch beam bouncing wildly as I scrambled over fallen logs and pushed through dense undergrowth. The rain, which had been so oddly gentle in the clearing, returned with vengeful force, sheeting down to the canopy, turning the forest floor into treacherous mud that threatened to send me sprawling with each step. I don't know how long I ran, or in which direction. My only thought was to put distance between myself and that clearing, between myself and Jonathan Wells with his corrupted camera and those dark veins crawling beneath his skin. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, legs trembling with exhaustion, I realized with sinking horror that I was completely lost. The reflective tag I placed to mark my departure from the trail was nowhere in sight. My torch beam revealed nothing but anonymous trees and undergrowth in every direction, all looking identical in the darkness and rain. I tried my radio, unsurprised when only static answered me. Tried to orient myself using the limited stars visible through breaks and clouds, but the forest canopy was too dense, allowing only occasional glimpses of the night sky. Insufficient for navigation. With no better option, I chose a direction that seemed to slope upward, reasoning that the trail to Last Echo Canyon generally followed a ridge line before its final descent. If I could reach higher ground, I might be able to reorient myself, might find a landmark I recognized. I walked for what felt like hours, the rain eventually subsiding to a gentle patter, then stopping altogether. The clouds began to break, allowing moonlight to filter through the canopy in silver shafts that provided just enough illumination to supplement my weakening torch. It was during one of these moments of improved visibility that I noticed something strange about the trees around me. Their bark was marked with dark patterns that couldn't be natural, not the random textures of natural growth, but deliberate, intricate designs that seemed to flow and shift even as I observed them. Patterns reminiscent of those dark veins I'd seen on Wells' skin on his camera. I approached the nearest trunk cautiously, playing my torch beam across its surface. The patterns were indeed similar, delicate, branching lines of substance that seemed neither solid nor liquid, but something in between, something that moved with subtle purpose. And as I watched, the pattern changed, rearranging itself before my eyes into a shape I recognized immediately. My own face, rendered in those dark, flowing lines. A perfect likeness, down to the smallest detail. Looking back at me from the tree trunk, I stumbled backward, a cry of shock escaping me before I could suppress it. The face on the tree didn't move, didn't change expression. Just watched me with eyes made of that same dark substance, eyes that somehow conveyed a patient, ancient hunger. I turned to flee again and found myself facing another tree. This one also marked with my likeness, and another beyond it, and another. Every trunk now bore my face, rendered in those flowing dark lines, watching me from all directions. What do you want? I shouted, turning in a complete circle, addressing all those identical faces, and whatever intelligence guided their creation. What are you? No verbal answer came, but the faces on the trees began to change, shifting, flowing, transforming into other visages, a progression of faces. Some I recognized as missing hikers from over the years, others unfamiliar, but all bearing the same vacant expression I'd seen on Jonathan Wells. All watching, all waiting, and I understood, with a clarity that felt like ice water in my veins, what Wells had meant. The dark that waits between the trees, the intelligence that borrows human eyes, human perspectives, that transforms those it chooses into extensions of itself, into recording devices for an entity that has existed in these woods since before humanity walked the earth. It had been watching us all along through the eyes of those it took, learning, growing, spreading through the forest like those dark veins, connecting everything into a vast network of observation and memory. And now it had seen me, had chosen me. I ran again, no longer caring about direction or finding the trail, driven only by blind panic. The faces on the trees followed my progress, flowing from trunk to trunk, always watching, always just at the periphery of my vision. When I finally broke through the tree onto a forest road, I was miles from where I should have been, on the eastern edge of the park, nowhere near Last Echo Canyon or the trailhead where I had left my vehicle. A passing motorist found me stumbling along the road just after dawn, soaked and exhausted, babbling about faces and trees and dark veins that moved with purpose. The official report states that I experienced temporary disorientation due to poor visibility and possible mild hypothermia. It notes that a search team located Jonathan Wells later that day, safely camped beside Last Echo Waterfall, having decided to stay overnight when the rain made the return journey hazardous. It records that he was in good health, with no memory of encountering me or any other ranger in a clearing the previous night. It makes no mention of a camera with dark veins crawling across its surface, or faces flowing like liquid shadow across tree trunks. Those details exist only in my memories, and in the nightmares that wake me on rainy nights like this one. But there's something else the report doesn't mention, something I've told no one, not even the park psychologist who conducted my mandatory evaluation after the incident. The small, dark mark I discovered on my wrist the day after my experience in the woods. A mark that resembles a delicate, branching vein, almost invisible except in certain lights. A mark that seems to pulse with its own subtle rhythm when I'm among trees, that grows fractionally larger each time I return to the forest. And sometimes, when I raise my camera to photograph the wilderness I'm sworn protected, I catch a glimpse of something moving within the lens, something watching through the glass and metal, something using my eyes now, as it used Wells' eyes, as it has used the eyes of countless others throughout the centuries. Learning, recording, spreading. The rain is heavier now, drumming against my cabin roof with that same almost language I mentioned earlier. Listen closely. Can you hear the pattern in it? The message it's trying to convey, it's calling to those it has touched, those it has marked, calling us back to the dark places between the trees, where it waits with patient hunger for new eyes, new perspectives, new vessels for its ancient consciousness. And one day, I know I will answer that call, will walk in the forest and never walk out again, at least not as the person I once was. But until then, I watch, I record, just as it wants me to do, just as it has always wanted. The rain against my cabin window sounds different tonight, heavier, more purposeful, each drop striking the glass with precision that almost suggests consciousness. Have you ever really listened to rain in the deep woods? It creates a symphony of sounds, the soft patter on high leaves, the hollow drumming on fallen logs, the gentle hiss as it filters through pine needles to finally reach the forest floor. I've been a ranger at Pine Haven National Park for almost 14 years now. It's beautiful country, ancient forests, mist-shrouded mountains, pristine lakes so clear they reflect the surrounding trees like perfect mirrors. Most visitors stick to the well-marked trails, the designated camping areas, the parts of the park that have been made accessible and, to some degree, safe. Few venture to the northern section, an area we call the Old Growth. The trees there stood for centuries, their massive trunks rising like columns in a forgotten cathedral. Their canopies so dense that even at midday, the forest floor remains in perpetual twilight. It's a primeval place, untouched and in many ways unknowable, That's where the Mirror Lake Trail leads, a narrow, often overgrown path that winds through the heart of the old growth to a small lake nestled in a valley between ancient mountains. The trail isn't on most visitor maps. It's not exactly hidden, but neither is it advertised. Those who know about it are usually serious hikers, nature photographers, or locals who've grown up with stories about the lake and its peculiar properties. I've always had an unusual relationship with Mirror Lake. Even before the incident I'm about to relate, I found myself drawn to it, yet simultaneously uneasy in its presence. There's something about the perfect stillness of its surface, the way it reflects not just the surrounding forest, but somehow enhances it, making the reflection seem more vivid, more real than what it mirrors. And the silence there, a silence so complete it feels like a physical presence, pressing against your ears, making you hesitant to speak above a whisper for fear of disturbing something ancient and watchful. The incident occurred during my 9th year at Pine Haven, late October, when the tourist season had wound down and the autumn rains had set in. I was working the evening shift at the main ranger station when a call came through. A hiker reported missing by his brother when he failed to return from a day trek. He was only going to Mirror Lake, the brother explained, his voice tight with worry. Said he'd be back before dark. It's not like him to be late, especially with the weather turning. I took down the details. Michael Thorne, 32, experienced hiker who visited the park regularly. He'd set out alone that morning, telling his brother he wanted to photograph Mirror Lake in the rain, when most visitors avoided it. The perfect solitude, he called it. It was nearly 9 p.m. now, fully dark, and there had been no word from him. His car remained in the trailhead parking lot. His planned route was straightforward, and he carried a satellite phone for emergencies, which was now going straight to voicemail. I'll head out to check the trail, I told his brother. If he's injured but somewhere along the path, I might be able to reach him tonight. Otherwise, we'll organize a full search team for dawn. I gathered my gear, torch, first aid kit, emergency shelter, extra food and water, and drove to Northern Trailhead as rain began to fall in earnest, drumming against my vehicle's roof, casting shifting shadows in my headlights as I navigated the narrow forest road. The Mirror Lake Trailhead was deserted when I arrived, save for a single car, a blue Subaru matching the description the brother had given. I verified the license plate, then prepared for what I knew would be a challenging hike. The trail was difficult in good conditions, steep in places, crossing several streams that would now be swollen with rain, passing through sections where the path all but disappeared beneath years of fallen leaves and pine needles. In the current weather, with darkness limiting visibility, it would be treacherous, but something in the brother's voice, a certainty that something was wrong, had compelled me to begin searching immediately rather than waiting for morning. I pulled on my rain gear, checked my torch, and set out along the trail, calling Michael's name every 100 yards or so. The forest swallowed my voice, the rain muffling sound, creating a cocoon of white noise that isolated me in a bubble of weak torchlight and cascading water. The trail climbed steadily for the first 2 miles, winding up the shoulder of an ancient, weathered mountain before beginning its descent into the valley where Mirror Lake lay. I found no sign of Michael during the ascent, no indication he had left the trail or encountered difficulties. It was during the descent, as the path grew steeper and more treacherous with rain-slick roots and loose stones, that I found the first evidence of his passage. A small, reflective triangle of fabric caught on a thorny branch beside the trail, the kind of marker experienced hikers sometimes leave to help navigate their return journey in difficult conditions. Encouraged, I pressed on, calling more frequently now, playing my torch beam along the sides of the trail for any further signs. The rain intensified as I descended deeper into the valley, becoming a steady downpour that penetrated even the dense canopy above, running in rivulets down exposed roots and rocks, turning sections of the path into miniature streams. I was perhaps half a mile from the lake when I found his backpack, propped carefully against a tree trunk beside the trail, not dropped or abandoned in haste. Deliberately placed, the straps fastened, the contents apparently undisturbed. Inside were extra clothing, food, water, a map, and a satellite phone with a dead battery. No wonder he hadn't responded to calls. But where was Michael himself? And why would he continue toward the lake without his supplies, especially in worsening weather? Michael Thorne. I called, directing my voice down the trail. Park Ranger. Can you hear me? Only the rain answered, its steady patter creating a white noise that seemed to absorb all other sounds. I secured the backpack and continued toward the lake, moving more cautiously now, a sense of unease growing with each step. Something about this didn't feel right. An experienced hiker wouldn't abandon his gear, wouldn't venture further without supplies, particularly as darkness fell. The trail descended more steeply as it approached the lake, becoming a series of switchbacks down the valley wall. In daylight, this section offered glimpses of the lake through gaps in trees, tantalizing flashes of the perfect reflection that drew hikers forward. In the current darkness and rain, I saw nothing beyond the reach of my torch beam, heard nothing but water striking leaves and earth, until suddenly I did hear something else, a voice, so faint I initially thought I'd imagined it. A single word carried on the wind. Help. I stopped, listening intently. Michael? I called. Michael Thorne? Is that you? The voice came again, clearer now. Help me. I'm at the lake. I can't move. Relief flooded through me. He was alive, conscious, communicating, but also injured, apparently unable to return up the trail. I quickened my pace, taking the switchbacks as fast as safety allowed, calling back that I was coming, that help was on the way. The forest opened up as I reached the valley floor, the dense canopy giving way to scattered trees, and then the open shoreline of Mirror Lake. Even in darkness, even in pouring rain, the lake lived up to its name, a perfect black mirror reflecting the storm clouds above, the surrounding trees, the occasional flash of distant lightning. And there, at the water's edge, I saw him, a figure sitting unnaturally still, facing the lake, seemingly oblivious to the rain soaking through his clothing. Michael? I approached cautiously, playing my torch beam across his seated form. I'm Ranger Cooper. Are you injured? He didn't turn, didn't acknowledge my presence in any way. Just continued to stare out at the lake's perfect, reflective surface. As I drew closer, I could see he was holding something, a camera, an expensive digital model with a large lens attached, pointed at the water. Michael, I tried again, now just a few feet away. Your brother sent me to find you. We need to get you back to the trailhead. Slowly, he turned his head toward me. His movements were stiff and mechanical, as if each small rotation required conscious effort. When his face came into my torch beam, I involuntarily took a step back. His expression was blank, utterly devoid of emotion or recognition. But it was his eyes that sent a chill through me. They reflected my torchlight in a way human eyes shouldn't, with a silvery, mirror-like quality that reminded me of the lake's surface. You shouldn't be here, he said, his voice flat, emotionless. It's not time yet. It's not your time. Michael, you're suffering from exposure. I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the growing sense that something was very wrong here. We need to get you warm and dry. Can you stand? He smiled then, a mechanical movement of facial muscles that never reached those reflective eyes. I'm not suffering, he said. I'm seeing, finally seeing. The lake shows you things if you look long enough, if you let it look back. I glanced at the camera in his hands, noticing for the first time that it was pointed not at the lake itself, but at his own reflection in the water. The lens was extended, focused on that dark mirror image. What are you photographing, Michael? I asked, trying a different approach. Not photographing, he replied, still in that flat, affectless tone. Connecting. The camera helps. A lens focusing on a lens. A reflection capturing a reflection. He turned back to the lake, adjusting the camera slightly. It's been here so long, he continued, watching through the water. All water is connected. Did you know that? All water remembers. But this water remembers most clearly. This water shows you what it's seen. A feeling of profound wrongness washed over me. This wasn't just hypothermia or exposure speaking. This was something else. Something that made the hairs on my neck stand on end despite the warmth of my waterproof clothing. We need to leave now, I said firmly, reaching for his arm. Your brother is worried. We need to get you medical attention. My fingers closed around his jacket sleeve, and I recoiled immediately, despite the rain soaking him through. His arm was ice cold, not the chill of someone caught in bad weather, but a deep, penetrating cold that seemed to radiate outward from his core. And where my hand had touched him, a silvery shine remained on his sleeve, like a patch of mirror, reflecting my torch beam back at me with perfect clarity. Don't touch me, he said, still not looking away from the lake. Not until I've seen everything. Not until it's shown me all it remembers. What is it showing you, Michael? I found myself asking, even as every instinct screamed at me to leave, to drag him away from the lake's edge by force if necessary. He tilted his head, considering. The beginning, he said after a long pause. The time before time. And the ending, too. All that will be. The lake remembers it all. The lake reflects everything, eventually. Lightning flashed across the sky, momentarily illuminating the entire valley with stark white light. In that instant, I saw something that I've spent every day since trying to convince myself was a trick of perception, an illusion born of fear and poor visibility. In the perfect reflection on the lake's surface, Michael wasn't alone. Figures stood behind him, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, stretching back into the depths of the reflected forest. Human shapes, but wrong somehow. Their proportions subtly distorted, their edges blurred as if they weren't fully present. And none of them cast their own reflections. They existed only in the mirror of the lake, watching, waiting, when darkness returned. I was already moving, grabbing Michael's arm with both hands, ignoring the icy cold that seemed to burn through my gloves, the silvery residue that clung to them afterward. I pulled him to his feet, expecting resistance, but he rose with surprising ease, like an empty shell with no weight of its own. You don't understand, he said, still in that emotionless voice. No one ever understands until they've seen their own reflection long enough, until they recognize what looks back isn't them anymore. We're leaving, I insisted. Try to guide him away from the shoreline back toward the trail. Now, he came without physical resistance, though he kept his head turned toward the lake as long as possible, those mirror-like eyes fixed on its dark surface. The camera remained clutched in his hands, lens extended, pointed back at the water even as we began to ascend the switchbacks. It won't let me leave, he said as we climbed, his voice still devoid of emotion, of fear. Not really. Part of me will always be there now, reflected, remembered, and part of it will always be in me. In this, he raised the camera slightly. For the first time, I noticed that something was wrong with the device itself. The metal of its body seemed to flow in places, to ripple like water despite being solid. The lens caught my torch beam and reflected it with a perfect clarity no glass should possess. We'll get you help, I promised, though I had no idea what kind of help could address whatever had happened to him at the lake's edge. Just keep moving, one step at a time. We made our way back up the trail in silence after that. The climb slow and treacherous in continuing rain. Michael moved mechanically, each step deliberate. his gaze now fixed straight ahead with an unblinking intensity that was almost as unsettling as his earlier behavior. When we finally reached the trailhead in my vehicle, dawn was breaking, a gray, reluctant light filtering through the still falling rain. I helped Michael into the passenger seat, noting how the raindrops rolled off his skin without seeming to wet it, how they gathered and pooled in perfect beads that reflected the interior of the car in miniature. "It's in the water," he said suddenly as I started the engine. "But it is not the water. It uses the reflections. It collects them, keeps them, becomes them." I drove in silence, unsure how to respond, increasingly certain that whatever had happened to Michael Thorne at Mirror Lake went beyond any medical condition I was familiar with. I took him directly to the regional hospital, where he was admitted for severe hypothermia and what the doctors tentatively diagnosed as hyponatremia, dangerously low sodium levels that can cause confusion and altered mental states. They assured his brother that with proper treatment, he would recover fully. The official report states that Michael Thorne became disoriented after spending several hours photographing Mirror Lake in poor weather conditions, leading to exposure and electrolyte imbalance. It notes that his camera and memory cards were damaged beyond recovery by water exposure, meaning none of the images he'd captured could be retrieved. It makes no mention of eyes that reflected light like mirrors, or of silvery residue that clung to anything that touched his skin, or the figures visible only in the lake's reflection during a lightning flash. Those details exist only in my memory, and in the nightmares that wake me on rainy nights like this one. Michael Thorne was released from hospital 3 days later, apparently recovered. He returned to his life, his job, his normal routines. But his brother contacted me 6 weeks afterward, concerned about subtle changes in Michael's behavior. A new habit of staring into reflective surfaces for long periods, a preference for being near water, a flatness of emotional effect that hadn't been present before. Sometimes, his brother confided, I catch him looking at his reflection in windows, in puddles, in anything that shows his image. And just for a second, it seems like what's looking back isn't quite him. I advised him to seek specialized psychiatric help for his brother, suggested possible trauma responses, dissociative conditions that might explain the behavior, all the rational explanations I'd been clinging to myself. But I didn't tell him about the changes I'd noticed in my own behavior since that night. The way I now avoid reflective surfaces when possible. The way water, all water, seems to pause momentarily when I pass, as if recognizing me, remembering me. The way I sometimes catch movement in mirrors from the corner of my eye, figures standing behind me that vanish when I turn to look. And I didn't tell him about the camera, Michael's camera, which he left in my vehicle that night. The one I'd intended to return to him, but instead locked away in a storage box in my cabin's attic. The one whose metal body flows like liquid when no one is watching. The one I sometimes hear clicking late at night as if taking photos on its own. The one that, when I finally worked up the courage to check its memory card, contained hundreds of images of Mirror Lake, all taken after I found Michael, after the camera should have stopped functioning. Images showing the lake's perfect reflective surface, and in it, shadows of figures standing on the shore, growing clearer with each photo, drawing closer, looking back through the lens with eyes like silver mirrors. Looking at me, I haven't been back to Mirror Lake since that night. I requested reassignment to the southern section of the park, as far from the old growth as possible. But sometimes in the deep stillness before dawn, I feel it calling me, not in words, but in a pull like gravity, drawing me northward back to that perfect reflective surface. Because that's the thing about mirrors. They remember everyone who looks into them, everyone who sees themselves reflected. And sometimes, if you look long enough, what looks back stops being your reflection and starts being something else. Something that was waiting all along for someone to provide a way out. The rain is falling harder now, drumming against my cabin roof, forming puddles on the ground outside my window, perfect little mirrors, reflecting the night sky, the surrounding trees, the light from my room. And if I look closely enough, I can see faces in those reflections, watching me, waiting for me to come closer, to look deeper, to finally recognize what's been looking back all along. The rain against my cabin roof tonight reminds me of that evening in Blackridge National Park. That steady, relentless drumming. Not the violent downpour of summer storm, but a persistent autumn rain that can last for days. The kind that seeps into everything, that transforms familiar landscapes into alien terrain, that muffles sound and blurs vision until the world contracts to just a few yards of visibility. I've been a forest ranger for almost 20 years now, 15 at my current post, but before that, 5 years at Blackridge, a vast wilderness of ancient forest and mist-shrouded mountains in the Pacific Northwest. Beautiful country, remote and largely untouched. The kind of place where you can hike for days without encountering another human soul. The kind of place where things can happen that defy explanation. Most of my career has involved fairly routine work, trail maintenance, visitor assistance, occasional search and rescue operations, standard procedures, protocols developed over decades, the comforting structure of training and experience that allows rangers to navigate the unpredictable nature of wilderness management. But there are some incidents that fall outside those protocols. Events that can't be neatly documented in official reports or explained away by rational analysis. The kind that keep you awake on nights like this, when the rain falls steadily and the darkness presses against your windows, reminding you of how thin the barrier is between the world we think we understand and whatever lies beyond it. This is one of those incidents. It began, as these things often do, your routine missing persons report. A hiker, David Keller, 34, hadn't returned from what was supposed to be a 3-day trek along the Northern Ridge Trail. His fiancée reported him missing when he failed to check in at the prearranged time, something she emphasized he had never missed before. He's meticulous about safety, she told me, her voice steady despite the obvious worry. He always calls when he says he will, even if he has to hike to higher ground to get signal. Something's wrong. I can feel it. I took down the details, Keller's description, his planned route, the equipment he was carrying, standard information for initiating a search operation. But something about this case nagged at me from the beginning. Perhaps it was a specific trail he'd chosen. The Northern Ridge, which passes through what locals call Quiet Zone, a section of the park where compasses have been known to give erratic readings and where, according to ranger lore, time seems to flow differently. Just stories, I'd always told myself. The kind of folklore that inevitably accumulates around remote wilderness areas. The search began the following morning. Myself and 2 other rangers split into teams to cover more ground, starting from the trailhead where Keller's car remained parked. The weather had been deteriorating for days, the rain falling steadily, transforming trails into muddy streams and making progress slow and treacherous. I took the section of trail that led directly into the Quiet Zone, following Keller's registered route along the ridge before it descended into an old-growth valley that contained some of the most ancient trees in the park. The forest there was different, darker, denser, the trees twisting into shapes that seemed almost deliberate, almost designed. The rain intensified as I hiked, reducing visibility, dampening sound until even my own footsteps seemed distant and muffled. I called Keller's name periodically, the sound swallowed by the dense vegetation and steady rainfall. About 4 miles in, where the trail begins its descent into the valley, I found the first sign of Keller's passage, a small camping area just off the main path, showing evidence of recent use. A fire pit with cold ashes, protected from the rain by an overhanging rock, the remnants of a temporary campsite, though the tent itself was gone, presumably packed up when he continued his journey. I radioed my discovery to the other search teams, then pressed on, following what should have been Keller's route according to his file plan. The trail grew steeper, more challenging as it wound down into the valley, the ancient trees growing larger and more densely packed, their canopies creating a ceiling so thick that the rain penetrated only as a fine mist. As I descended deeper, something strange began to happen. The mist grew thicker, not just from the rain filtering through canopy, but a ground-level fog that swirled around the massive tree trunks, obscuring the path ahead and making navigation increasingly difficult. And with it came a silence, not just the muffling effect of rain and fog, but a complete absence of sound that felt almost physical in its intensity. No bird calls, no rustle of small animals in the undergrowth, not even the patter of rain on leaves. Just absolute, perfect silence, broken only by my own breathing and footsteps, which sounded oddly flat, as if the air itself were absorbing the sound waves before they could properly travel. I checked my watch, 11:43 a.m., checked my radio to confirm it was still functioning, though the indicator light showed no signal in this deep valley. Standard for this region of the park. Nothing unusual. Yet something felt deeply wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. A wrongness that went beyond poor weather conditions or concern for a missing hiker. David Keller. I called again, my voice sounding strange even in my own ears, as if it were coming from very far away. Park Ranger, can you hear me? And then, remarkably, an answer came, faint but distinct, from somewhere ahead in the mist-shrouded forest. Here, I'm over here. Relief flooded through me. I moved forward more quickly, calling again, following the voice that responded, guided me off the main trail and deeper into the ancient forest. The fog thickened further, swirling around me in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, almost intelligent, revealing just enough of the way ahead to keep me moving, but never enough to see my destination clearly. I don't know how long I followed that voice. Time seemed to behave strangely in a fog-shrouded valley, minutes stretching or contracted without pattern or reason. But eventually, I pushed through a final curtain of mist and found myself in a small clearing among the massive trees. And there was David Keller, sitting calmly on a fallen log, his backpack beside him, looking for all the world as if he were simply taking a break during a routine hike. No signs of injury, no distress, no indication why he'd missed his check-in, or why he was so deep in an area that should have only been a brief passing point according to his register route. Mr. Keller? I approached cautiously, years of search and rescue experience having taught me that people in wilderness survival situations can sometimes behave unpredictably. I'm Ranger Mitchell. Your fiancé reported you missing when you didn't check in. Are you all right? He looked up at me with an expression of mild surprise, as if my presence was unexpected but not particularly concerning. Missing? He repeated, his tone puzzled. I'm not missing. I'm exactly where I plan to be. And I just spoke to Sarah this morning. She knows I'm fine. That stopped me cold. This morning, Mr. Keller, you've been out of contact for over 3 days. Today is Thursday. You were supposed to check in on Monday evening. Something flickered across his face then, confusion, quickly followed by a deeper disquiet. He reached for his watch, examined it with a frown. That can't be right. I left the trailhead on Monday morning. I've only been hiking for a few hours. I studied him more carefully, looking for signs of confusion, disorientation, any indication of a head injury or medical condition that might explain his apparent loss of time. But he appeared perfectly healthy. No visible injuries, no signs of exposure or dehydration. His clothing was barely damp, despite the days of constant rainfall. What's the last thing you remember clearly? I asked, taking a seat on the log beside him, keeping my voice calm and non-threatening. He rubbed his temples, his expression becoming more troubled. I started on the Northern Ridge Trail. perfect weather, clear skies. I was making good time. He gestured vaguely at the surrounding forest. Then I came down into this valley, and the fog rolled in. I thought I should wait for it to clear before continuing, so I found this spot to rest. He looked at me, genuine confusion in his eyes. That was maybe 2 hours ago. Certainly not 3 days. I nodded, trying to project a reassurance I didn't feel. 3 days of time seemingly vanished from his experience. It wasn't unprecedented in wilderness situations, disorientation, exposure. Sometimes even mild hypothermia could affect memory and perception time. But Keller showed none of the physical signs that should accompany such conditions. Let's get you back to the trailhead, I suggested, standing. Your fiancé is worried sick, and once we're back in range, I need to radio the other search teams that we found you. He nodded, gathering his backpack with movements that suggested no stiffness, no physical discomfort of any kind. As he stood, I noticed something odd about the log where we'd been sitting. A perfect circle of dry, untouched ground surrounding it, despite the days of rainfall that had soaked the rest of clearing, as if the log and Keller himself had somehow been sheltered from the passage of time that had affected everything else. We began to climb back toward the ridge trail, retracing my steps through the fog-shrouded forest. Keller followed close behind me, occasionally muttering to himself, checking his watch and phone repeatedly, as if hoping the dates displayed might suddenly correct themselves. About halfway up the slope, he stopped abruptly. I need to show you something, he said, his voice tight with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. Something I found before you arrived. Before I could respond, he was moving again, not back toward the log where I'd found him, but in a different direction entirely, deeper into the ancient forest. I called after him, but he didn't slow, didn't look back, forcing me to follow or risk losing him in the thickening fog. He led me to a massive oak tree, its trunk wider than a car, its branches twisting upward to disappear into the mist. At its base was a small opening, not quite a cave, but a hollow where the roots had grown in a way that created a space large enough for a person to enter in a crouched position. In there, Keller said, pointing. I found it right before you arrived. I was about to investigate when I heard you calling. Every instinct warned against entering that dark hollow beneath the ancient tree, but Keller was already kneeling, already peering into the darkness, and my responsibility was to keep him safe, to ensure he returned to the trailhead and his waiting fiancée. I crouched beside him, playing my torch beam into the opening. The hollow was deeper than it initially appeared, the roots creating a tunnel that extended beyond the reach of my light. The ground within was dry, the earth undisturbed, as if the constant rain had never penetrated this space. I heard something moving in there, Keller said, his voice hushed, like whispering, but not in any language I recognized. I was about to suggest we leave, continue our ascent back to the trail, when something caught my eye, a faint gleam in the darkness beyond my torch beam. Something metallic, perhaps reflecting the light. Wait here, I said, already knowing he wouldn't. Let me check. I had to remove my backpack to fit through the opening. The space tight even for my frame. The tunnel extended about 10 feet before opening into a small chamber hollowed out beneath the massive tree. The walls formed by twisting roots that looked almost like limbs frozen in movement, almost like they had been deliberately arranged to create this space. And there, in the center of the earthen floor, was the source of the reflection, a pocket watch. Old, antique, its case tarnished silver, its face yellow with age. It lay open, the hands frozen at 11:43. The exact time I had checked my own watch before hearing Keller's voice calling from fog. I reached for it, some part of me already knowing I shouldn't touch it, shouldn't disturb whatever force had placed it in this impossible space beneath an ancient tree in a fog-shrouded valley where time itself seemed mutable. The moment my fingers closed around the cold metal, the whispering started, not from any specific direction, but from everywhere at once, from the roots that form the chamber walls, from the earth itself, not words, not language as I understood it, but patterns of sound that nonetheless conveyed meaning, that pressed against my consciousness with ideas and images I had no context to properly interpret. And with them came a certainty bone deep and terrifying. I was not alone in that root chamber. Something was there with me, watching from everywhere and nowhere. Something that existed in the spaces between moments, in the gaps between seconds where time flowed differently, where 3 days could pass in what felt like hours. I scrambled backward, the pocket watch still clutched in my hand, desperate to escape the close confines of that root chamber, the whispering that grew louder with each passing moment, the presence that pressed ever closer, though I could see nothing in the beam of my frantically moving torch. I burst back into the gray daylight, gasping for breath, expecting to find Keller, waiting where I'd left him. He was gone. Keller, I shouted, scanning the fog-shrouded forest. David Keller. No answer came but the whispering, no longer confined to the hollow beneath the tree, but now emanating from the forest itself, from the mist that swirled more thickly around me, shapes almost forming in its twisting patterns before dissolving again. I ran. Blind panic drove me up the slope, no longer following any path, just desperate to escape the valley, the fog, the whispering that followed close behind. I clutched the pocket watch, unable to make myself discard it despite the certainty that it was somehow connected to whatever dwelled in that place where time behaved differently. I don't know how long I ran, or in what direction. Time continued to slip and slide around me, minutes stretching to what felt like hours, then contracting again in sickening lurches. The fog thickened further, then abruptly cleared as I stumbled onto the ridge trail, gasping for breath, my clothing soaked with sweat and rain. I checked my watch, needing to anchor myself in normal time again. 5:17 p.m., nearly 6 hours since I first encountered Keller in that clearing. 6 hours that felt simultaneously like minutes and days. My radio crackled to life, startling me so badly I nearly dropped it. I was back in signal range. One of the other search team members, voice thick with concern. Mitchell, do you copy? We've been trying to reach you for hours. Where are you? Over. I raised the radio with shaking hands. I copy. I'm on the ridge trail, about 4 miles in from the northern trailhead. I found Keller, but I lost him again. I need backup. Over. Say again? You found Keller? Where? Over. In the valley. But he's gone now. I can't... It's hard to explain. I need backup. Over. There was a pause, and... Mitchell, are you all right? You sound disoriented. What's your exact position? Over. I looked around, trying to orient myself, to find a landmark I recognized. But the ridge trail stretched identical in both directions, the fog still thick enough to limit visibility to a few dozen yards, and the pocket watch in my hand, when I glanced down, still showed 11:43. Its hands frozen despite the gentle tick-tick-tick I could feel against my palm. I don't know exactly. I admit it, somewhere on a ridge above the Old Grove Valley. I'm heading back toward the northern trailhead. Meet me there, and be careful in the valley. Something's wrong there. Time doesn't work right. Over. Another pause, longer this time. When the voice came again, it was cautious, concerned. Mitchell, stay where you are. We're converging on your position based on radio triangulation. Don't move. We'll find you. Over. I should have followed those instructions. Should have stayed put, waited for the other search teams to locate me. But the whispering had returned. Fainter now, more distant but unmistakable. And with it, carried on the swirling mist, a voice that might have been Keller's. Help me. I can't find my way out. Help me? I couldn't ignore it. Whatever had happened to Keller in that valley, Whatever it caused him to lose 3 days of time and then disappear again, I was partly responsible. I had found him and then lost him, left him alone in that place where time slipped and folded like origami. I switched off my radio and headed back down the trail, toward the valley, toward the whispering in the voice that might have been Keller's. The mist closed around me almost immediately, as if it had been waiting, as if it had never truly let me escape. The descent seemed to take both forever and no time at all. One moment I was on the ridge trail. The next I was pushing to the final curtain of fog into the clearing where I had first found Keller. The log was still there, still surrounded by that perfect circle of dry ground. But now there was something else, a line of objects placed with careful precision on the log's weathered surface. A pocket watch, identical to the one I held. Another beside it, the same. Another and another and another, dozens of them, stretching the length of the fallen tree, all open, all with their hands frozen at 11:43. And sitting beside them, exactly where I'd first found him, was David Keller, but not as he had been. His clothing was now tattered, worn as if he'd been wearing the same outfit for months rather than days. His beard, neatly trimmed when I found him earlier, now grew long and wild. His eyes, when he raised them to meet mine, held a knowledge and a weariness that hadn't been there before. "You came back," he said, his voice rough as if from disuse. "I wasn't sure you would. Time works differently for you than for me. I've been waiting a while." I approached cautiously, the pocket watch clutched tight in my hand. "Keller, what happened to you? Where did you go?" He smiled, a sad expression that never reached his eyes. "I never left. I've been right here. But you slipped sideways, into normal time. I couldn't follow." "I don't understand," I said, though a terrible suspicion was beginning to form. "It's only been a few hours since I found you." He gestured to the line of pocket watches. "Take a closer look." I did, moving along the log to examine them. Each was similar but subtly different. Some more tarnished, some less, some with Roman numerals, some with Arabic. Different makers, different years, but all stopped at the exact same time. "What are these?" I asked, though I already knew, somehow, already understood with clarity that made my blood run cold. "Anchors," Keller said simply. "Each one belongs to someone who found their way into this place. This fold in time. Most of them never found their way out again." He pointed to a watch near the center of the line. "That one is mine. I found it in a hollow beneath an ancient oak, just like you found yours." "How do you know I?" "Because that's how it works," he interrupted. "That's how it's always worked. The watches are how it marks us, how it measures us." He looked past me into the swirling mist that surrounded the clearing. "How it finds us again if we manage to slip away." "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Keller's gaze returned to me, his eyes reflecting the gray light in a way that seemed too bright, too silver. "I don't know if it has a name. If it ever did, it's been forgotten. It lives in the spaces between moments, in the gaps between seconds. It collects experiences, collects time." He gestured to his aged appearance. "I've been here for years by my reckoning, but out there, in normal time, only a few hours have passed since you found me the first time." I looked down at the watch in my hand, still ticking softly against my palm, despite its hands remaining fixed at 11:43. "And these watches, connections," he said, "anchors that bind us to this place, that let it find us if we stray." He nodded toward the mist-shrouded forest. "The others are out there, wandering. Sometimes they find their way back here, to this clearing. Sometimes they're lost for what feels like years before they stumble back. But none of us can leave, not permanently, not while our watches remain here." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the damp or cold. You're saying we're trapped? That I'm trapped now too. Keller's expression softened slightly. Not necessarily. You're newer. Your connection isn't as strong yet. You might still be able to leave, to stay in normal time, if you're willing to make a trade. What kind of trade? He gestured toward the line of watches. Leave yours. Take someone else's. It confuses a connection, scrambles the anchor, lets you slip away whilst trying to recalibrate, to find a new pattern. I stared at him, the full implication of his words sinking in, but then someone else would be connected to my watch. Someone else would be trapped instead of me. He nodded, no judgment in his eyes. Just a weariness born of too much time spent in a place where time itself was malleable. That's the choice. The only choice if you want to leave. I looked at the line of watches, each representing a person who had stumbled into this fold in time, this place where moments stretched and contracted without reason. People with lives, families, futures, all suspended in this eternal, fog-shrouded now, including now me, unless I chose to switch my anchor with another's, to escape at the cost of ensuring someone else remained trapped. The search teams found me just after dusk, huddled at the base of a tree on the ridge trail, clutching a tarnished pocket watch and mumbling about time that didn't work right. They attributed my disorientation to exposure and possible mild hypothermia, though the medical examination at the ranger station found no physical abnormalities. The official report states that David Keller remains missing, presumed lost in the rugged terrain and poor weather conditions. It notes that experienced hikers can become disoriented in heavy fog, can make fatal errors in judgment when visibility is compromised and familiar landmarks obscured. It makes no mention of a valley where time behaves differently, or of pocket watches stopped at 11:43, or of a presence that exists in the gaps between moments. Those details exist only in my memory, and in the nightmares that wake me on rainy nights like this one. I requested a transfer to the following month. I couldn't stay at Blackridge, couldn't continue to work in a place where I knew such a temporal anomaly existed, where I knew people were trapped, wandering in a fog-shrouded valley that existed partly outside normal time. But distance hasn't helped, because the pocket watch came with me, the one I chose from that long line on the fallen log, not my own which I left behind, creating a connection between this place and whichever poor soul's anchor I took, buying my freedom with another's eternal imprisonment. I tell myself I had no choice, that I have responsibilities, people who depend on me, a life I couldn't simply abandon to wander forever in a misty nowhere outside of normal time. But I know the truth. I made a selfish choice, the kind that wakes you in the darkest part of night, that sits like a stone in your chest during quiet moments. And I live with the knowledge that the watch I took, a silver hunter case model with an ornate engraving of a stag on its cover, belongs to someone who remains there still, someone whose anchor I stole, whose connection I severed and replaced with my own, someone who will never escape that fog-shrouded valley where time flows differently, where moments stretch and contract without pattern or reason, where the whispering comes from everywhere and nowhere, from the gaps between seconds where something watches, something waits, something collects. The watch no longer keeps time. Its hands frozen at 11:43, the moment I enter that fold in reality. But sometimes in the deep silence of night, I hear it ticking, a soft, rhythmic sound that comes not from the watch itself, but from somewhere just beyond normal perception. And with it, barely audible beneath the ticking, the whispering returns. Patterns of sound that almost form words, that press against my consciousness with meanings I cannot fully grasp, reminding me that my escape was temporary, that the connection was scrambled but not broken, that the anchor remains, pulling me back one tick at a time toward that place where time itself is malleable. One day, I know, I'll wake to find myself back in that clearing, sitting on that fallen log surrounded by a perfect circle of dry ground in a forest where rain falls constantly. Back where David Keller still waits, still ages while the world outside continues in normal time. Back where dozens of pocket watches mark the presence of those who found their way into a fold in reality and could not find their way out again, including, once again, me. The rain is heavier now, drumming against my cabin roof in that steady, relentless rhythm. Listen closely. Can you hear the pattern in it? The almost words forming in the spaces between drops? Can you hear the ticking?